Hi everyone. My name, of course, is Dr. Julie Two Moon, and I'm blessed to be here with you today. I wanted to talk about something that comes up a lot in my conversations with women and, of course, in my years in practice, which is the whole mystery syndrome. So where you have all these symptoms, right? You've been to the doctor. I think a lot of you have been there. You've been to the doctor. You're like, look, I am in pain. I have joints that don't work right. My digestion isn't right. My sleep isn't right. My mood isn't right. And I'm tired. Or maybe you're noticing that your body just doesn't function the right way. Your mind is foggy. And they run the test and they keep coming back and telling you like it's all normal. There's no real discernible problem here. And you're sitting there going, this is so far from normal, it's not even funny. Like, how are you telling me that there's nothing to identify? There's no illness, there's no diagnosis, there's no pattern that you're going to tell me is happening. And then you're kind of left in that space of this is just how it goes. Well, these patterns are becoming more and more common, and the reason is actually very specific. So the way that our body works is that in a normal, healthy, functioning state, what happens is, we have cells, and those cells are making energy, they're processing toxins, they're sending signals, they're responding to hormones. They're doing all of these things over and over and over every single day. Now, what you probably haven't been spoken to about is that your cells exist in what's called a cellular matrix. So there's an intracellular inside the cell matrix, and there's an extracellular outside the cell matrix. Now, these aspects of our body are so key because they contribute so much to how our body functions. And then sadly, though, in a lot of medicine, it just gets passed over. Like it's a non-event. Those structures don't exist. But here's the deal. The function of those intra and extracellular spaces is integral and key to how your body works. So let's just take that extracellular space. This space is magical. If you've never looked into it, I have to tell you, it is magical. Hi, Sarita. It is this slightly crystalline, water-based substance that is immediately in communication with any aspect of your body. Now think about that. Your nervous system has like a delay, technically. Like you stub your toe and you may not notice the delay, but there's actually a delay. In this extracellular matrix, there's no delay. Your toe knows what's happening at your thumb, at your ear, at your eye right now. Now, why is this so key? Because this matrix is the ground substance that makes up 99% of who you are. You've heard physicists talk about, that matter is 99% empty space. And the reality is that atoms are spaced apart, and most of the space in matter is technically empty, although I wouldn't call it empty. But we exist in that same way. Most of our body is this space between things. And this space between things actually determines the outcome of our health, which is why so much of the time when people are presenting with these patterns that, medicine is looking at you and shrugging their shoulders and saying, I'm so sorry, I don't have an answer for you. It's here, it's in this other space that these events are happening. And what's happening most of the time is, on one hand, this space can get actually rather boggy. It can get rigid. Now imagine what happens if the space that makes up 99% of you gets rigid or boggy or sticky. Imagine what happens to the transfer of nutrients in their pathway to the cell. Imagine what happens to the space around your nerves. Imagine what happens to the ability of hormones to reach those structures. Imagine what happens to your body's ability to detoxify. Imagine what happens to your body's ability to control inflammation. It all goes sideways, and it goes sideways quickly. Now, here's the other aspect of this. This space, because it's in immediate contact and communication with the rest of your body, when one aspect of it becomes stressed, becomes boggy, starts to get sticky, what happens is that the rest of the space knows this. And initially the body says, oh, we've got a problem over here. But if that problem goes unresolved, because a lot of this happens sort of silently. So a lot of times, we don't notice that we're going off kilter. Now, maybe that's because, we don't spend enough time connecting to our body. Maybe that's because when we were younger, no one talked to us about, what it feels like to be in us, to be in this body. Maybe that's because along the way, we're not taught to feel our feelings. And sometimes those stuckness places start with anger and fear and sadness and, rage and anxiety and feelings of lack of worth that get stuck in the body. Maybe it's all of those things and more. Maybe it's because the subtle creeping in of foods that aren't ideal for us, that creates stuckness in that pattern. Maybe it's because when we don't sleep and we just prop ourselves up with caffeine, we kind of like don't notice the impact. There's all these things. Maybe it's also because the worse we feel, that, the tendency is for our body to rise up and say, my gosh, she's got stuff to do. And so stress hormones get produced in massive quantities. However, the multitude of possible reasons, what happens ultimately is that we don't really notice that stuckness is happening. We don't notice that space is getting rigid. And so it just keeps propagating. And as this happens, then more and more spaces, it sort of spreads, because more and more spaces start to be impacted by that lack of mobility, because these sequences, these structures, they're all connected. So if I have lack of movement in my right leg, let's just say, if there's part of my right leg that has lack of movement, well, initially it doesn't affect my left arm or my heart or my lungs, but the longer that it happens, what you need to understand is that there's this beautiful dynamic interconnectedness in the movement between structures in the body. So the longer that stasis stays there, the more then that energy, that movement, that life force can't move through that area. Well, then over time, that does start to impact the organ structures. That starts to impact the cellular structures. Suddenly the lymph is involved. Now we've got all this other involvement that may have started with, oh, that stasis in my right leg. And so that is often how these quote unquote mystery syndromes start to develop, is because there was lack of nutrition, lack of movement, lack of attention given, because we didn't really know to give it attention. And then that ends up spreading. Now, a lot of times, because our body does some neat workarounds. I always think of our body as really, truly like, how can I work around this problem? So when people go test, a lot of times medicine looks in your blood. So they say, oh, the blood looks normal. Well, blood is an essential substance. It has its own rules. So our body will maintain the patency of blood ahead of the tissues any day, because when the blood goes out of balance pretty quickly, we're in trouble. I mean, we're like in the ER or no longer living in trouble. So the blood often doesn't show what the adaptations of the tissue are experiencing. And this goes for hormonal problems too, because let's say your thyroid is out of balance. The gland itself may be producing enough hormone, and maybe they check that and they say to you, no, your gland is fine. It's not a thyroid problem. But those tests aren't telling us anything about if the cells are responding or if those thyroid hormones can make it through that sticky matrix. And so at the end of the day, what may be happening is, yes, there's plenty, but no, it's not reaching its target. No, it's not taking action. And what happens then is we can develop inflammation. What happens when we have a low thyroid? We get tired. What happens? The cells can't make energy. They can't process glucose. The cells can't maintain that vital force. Now, that means in the muscles that we start to lose that vital force. So then we see weakness. In the skin, we start to lose skin integrity. In the digestive system, we see motility changes. We see decrease in stomach acid. We see decrease in pancreatic enzymes. We see failure to use glucose effectively. See all these downstream effects of this one small disruption. Now, those disruptions then can create disruptions in, let's say, metabolism of calcium at the cell or metabolism of magnesium. Maybe those things then lead to disruption of our ability to metabolize vitamin D. So you might be taking vitamin D, but it's not making any difference. Well, vitamin D is highly dependent on a number of other nutrients, and there's a huge relationship between magnesium's usage in the body and vitamin D's ability to be metabolized. Among the relationship, between vitamin D and vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin K, it gets big so fast. Now, if we add to that if this matrix, the more stuck it gets, the more it is a challenge to even get those nutrients to the cell. So then we can be in the position where we're taking all those quote unquote great nutrients, but they can't reach the cells. So the cells are starving, even though you're putting them in, which is why ultimately, when we look at those mystery patterns, we cannot really get stuck looking at the surface. And this is, I think, why a lot of people stay sick for so long, is that sadly, in a lot of medicine, both conventional and alternative, the viewpoint is too surface. It's really looking at something that isn't the problem and keeps looking there. Or maybe they try to blame it. It's like, oh, this whole problem is candida. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard that. And here's the problem with that thinking. Candida will only find a happy place if the terrain is disrupted to allow it to flourish. It still goes back to this idea of the terrain. Think about a swamp. You know, Candida is a fungus. So if your extracellular spaces, if your intracellular spaces, if they're boggy and damp and stuck, well, of course they're going to be good terrain for a fungus. It's going to love living there. You don't starve the fungus out, which is a horrible proposition. I've seen that ruin people's health. You have to change the terrain, and then suddenly it's like having drained the swamp. Well, now there's no fungus because it's not damp. It's not a good place to live. And that's how health needs to be approached. And this is the key behind, you know, mystery syndromes, or any time that you're in that position where you're saying, look, this isn't right. This is not how I'm supposed to feel. This is not how I'm supposed to have my experience of life be. And people are looking at you saying, well, gosh, I just don't know. If they're saying, gosh, I just don't know, I can translate that for you. It doesn't fall within, you know, the paradigm of how the body is viewed in their eyes, and that's okay. We all learn different things. We all have different specialties. We all have different, you know, means that we're attracted to. But the reality is if the terrain can be adjusted, which it can be. So the way we adjust the terrain is first by making sure that we understand where we're supposed to be putting the emphasis. It can't be every piece of emphasis right from the beginning. So maybe in some places we have to start by toning down the aggravation to the nervous system. Maybe in other people we have to open up those organs of drainage. We have to open up the liver. We have to nourish and open up the kidneys so that your body has a pathway to exit. Because if there's no pathway, there's no resolution. Maybe it's about the gut. Maybe the gut needs to be helped so that it can finally relax and those tissue structures can start to heal so that you can actually start to absorb what's happening. Maybe it's your blood is too viscous. Maybe it's that your cells can't respond because you're stuck in the stress state. These are all things that have to be assessed and then appropriate action taken for where the biggest impact is happening right now. Because then as we drain, and I love that, I love the word drain, because to me, that concept in the body is, let me gently collude with you to create movement by melting the restriction. See, nothing about that's forceful. We then aren't stuck in a state we're trying to pound anything into submission. We're not trying to force the body, circumvent its wisdom. It's going, oh, body has wisdom. Let me partner with the wisdom and create change in a way that allows for resolution and return of vitality so that then the terrain will shift into the balance of that vital state. And then what will happen as far as that goes is, oh, look, Candida can't live here anymore. Oh, look, the adrenal glands are happy. Oh, look, the cells are responding to thyroid. Oh, look, because of that, this is no longer boggy and the inflammation is leaving. This is how we address mystery syndromes. If you notice, nowhere in there was it the diagnosis is, because the reality is that for most conditions in the body, the diagnosis ends up being a little bit irrelevant. And I say that because you can have, you can have 10 people in a room that have arthritis or that have chronic fatigue syndrome. And there's going to be 10 different combinations of reasons why they ended up in that position. It's not going to be, aha, everybody who has this condition has this problem. It's not always Epstein-Barr. It's not always, some other chronic infection. Maybe those are components, but it's not always going to be there. And this is what's so key, is that when we partner with the body, we're not stuck on the diagnosis. We're not stuck on it has to be this one thing. We are looking at this whole person who has emotions and feelings and beliefs. They have a past history. They've encountered traumas. They've been exposed to different toxins. They've had, they had different inherited patterns, and we're taking it all into account. And that's why the mystery syndromes don't pose the same challenge as to, that paradigm where it has to be one rigid set of parameters that creates the diagnosis and that's it. And so I really want you to encourage you to think about your body in this dynamic, interconnected way, and think about healing as a melting and return of subtle movement, and think about that communication as this beautiful language that's already there inside of you, and that healing is the process of waking that up and bringing that back into the open. That's what that vitality is. You know, in naturopathic medicine, we talk about vital force. It's the return of that force of creation alive and fully moving and permeating throughout every cell of your body. That's healing. And we do that by being cognizant and aware and gentle and compassionate and looking at healing as a partnership. Then we don't get stymied. That's why, you know, when I work with my clients, you know, I'll look at what their diagnoses are, but what I'm really looking for is what's happening in the background. There's no set, like, just because you've been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, now we're going to do all these 4 things for every one of you. It's about what's happening in the background. This is the key to healing. And this also takes away all the fear. It takes away all the wonder, will they really know what's wrong? Because when we do a terrain-based analysis, of course we know what's wrong. We can find the patterns because the terrain always gives you those keys. All those symptoms that you have, that maybe the doctors have been dismissive to you about, and I'm really sorry if that's happened to you. And maybe people have passed it off as depression. Maybe they've passed it off as age. Maybe they've passed it off as some other, you know, kind of ridiculous assumption. The reality is that those are all the indications that the terrain needs attention. Those are all beautiful clues as to what needs to happen next. And it is possible. And you are worth it. And you can have your healing. It is yours. You can reclaim that vitality and that birthright and live in that space and go celebrate it in all the ways that you really want to. I encourage you just to sit with that. Really connect with that. This body is not a burden. It is a beautiful gift. And although sometimes it goes sideways and we get sick and we don't feel like ourselves and we wonder, will it ever change? The body is not a burden. It is a wise, beautiful structure. It has immense ability to show us what's happening. And if we can understand and follow those cues, then we can heal. That is what I do with my clients. And that is what, you know, I was trained to do by amazing healers from all over the world. But that's possible for anyone. There's healing that is possible for anyone. If you're willing to start to relate to the process in a different way and let your body take part in the healing and start to mend that relationship. It's another big part of this. It's mending the relationship between you and your structures so that you start to compassionately appreciate all that they've done, all the support they've given, all the ways they've done those workarounds to keep you upright, and partner with them so that that restoration can be complete. All right, guys, blessings. Thanks for watching.